And David Billings has been around for a long time. He is the lead organizer and trainer with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond in the New York City office. He's been with the People's Institute for 30 years. He trains, lectures, and works with groups organizing to undo racism. He has been part of the Institute's work on reducing structural inequalities in child welfare. Dave Billings is a historian of the nation's race construct and how it determines systemic disparities by race still today. Billings was born in Mississippi and for 35 years lived and worked in New Orleans. He has lived in New York City since 2004, and we're delighted to have him here in New Jersey.
How's everyone this morning?
Good.
Yeah? It's been kind of weak, but we're glad we're here. I'm with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. We're community organizers, and for the past 10 or 12 years, we have been working within the structures of the United States, the huge systemic structures, such as child welfare, and they come under many names: criminal justice. I don't have to call them all out for you. One thing we find is that while white people might be 60% of the general population, that's not the issue. We control all of the systems of the United States. We train people, we degree people, we promote people, we license people, we all along the line. So the control of social change in the United States is very firmly under the grip of those of us in the dominant culture. And as we approach systems, you would think there is no problem in the United States in terms of how we're doing. Because everybody that works for a 501c3, everybody who works for an institution sponsored by the government, just has nothing but saying we're doing a really good job. And that's no offense, because we are doing as best a job as we can do. But what we are faced with are systemic realities that are as dramatic in the inequities as they were in 1960, as they were in 1860. You know, history just doesn't inform the United States present. It creates and continues to create its reality. This country, and the reason we have disproportionalities of such dramatic, such magnitude, which is a new word. We never spoke that except, 10 or 12 years ago. All of a sudden we discovered disproportionality. Well, we've been having disproportionality from the very foundation of the nation. Is that right? Give me a little energy here. I know it's early. The reason that we started doing Undoing Racism workshops with a group that we now call ourselves the People's Institute for Survival. That's how we started off. Well, people in the neighborhood, and you ask them, how you doing? Say, I'm just trying to survive. Ain't nothing but the rent. I'm hanging in there, And then someone said, well, we got to do more than just survive. We got to go beyond survival. So we said, oh, that's good. We'll call ourselves the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Now, why did we start this workshop or this organization? Because those of us who were being trained as community organizers were being trained by what we thought were the greatest organizing schools in the United States, coming out of the Alinsky model. But you know something? As great as they were, they never talked about race. As if somehow we were told, well, race is a divisive issue. We said, well, hell, we're already divided. We might well understand why. Second thing is, we were never taught about history, and yet the communities we worked in, history was everything. And then we didn't talk about culture. As Paulo Freire would say, culture is the lifeblood of the community. You pull the plug on culture and the people die. That's what it wasn't our services that were keeping people alive. People weren't poor because they lacked services. You couldn't walk outside the door without tripping over a service. People were poor because they lacked power. And yet, one of the most dramatic examples of the civil rights movement were not all the great legislation that was passed, but civil rights would fuel the creation of one of the largest segments of society that created career paths for those of us who serve as buffers between large systems and community people. Large systems, we call them gatekeepers, those of us who get the 501c3 and begin to be nonprofits, trained by the great schools of this country, but rarely understanding systemic racism. In 1790, I ain't going to go back all that, I'm just going to mention it. But you study it in that Naturalization Act, which wouldn't be substantially changed until the 1950s. The 1790 Naturalization Act says only free white people, meaning white men, women, and children, may begin the process of becoming citizens of the United States. In 1952, that Naturalization Act is tweaked a bit. In 75, it's tweaked again. Elizabeth Martinez on the West Coast, she said, study that act. And what she wanted us to understand through the study was that between 1790 and 1952, every system in the United States would be created. And would be created not only when white supremacy reigned, but when it was the law of the land. You just don't change systems overnight. We began to do the Undoing Racism workshop because communities of color were just inundated with those of us like myself who were white. We ran all the programs. We were the representatives of the systems as they interacted. We evaluated. We researched. We did everything. And yet we weren't accountable to the communities that we were serving. And I'm sure you've made great strides on that. But one of the things that the Undoing Racism workshop points out, and I know that these women here are going to talk about all of this in their own states, is that you have to understand as a collective. People always say in the United States, well, I know everything about racism. I know all that. If you're old enough, you say, I came out of the 60s. If you're young enough, you say, I come out of the MTV generation, We all know, but our collectives don't know, see? You can have all the expertise in the world, but if you're not organized as a collective, then that expertise doesn't translate into systemic change. You go to the great schools of social work and sociology. You ask the dean, say, we've got all sorts of race-critical theorists here. Everybody on the faculty is published. So yeah, but are you working together? No. Because we're fragmented, we're divided, we're split up into different specializations. And now in this country, organizing is if not demeaned, it's kept to a minimum. See, we can't just have programs. Programs don't lead to liberation. We can't just have advisory groups. See, that's an interesting thing. I got a parental advisory group. Well, the parents are the core of your constituency. Why are they just giving advice? Most of our systems, if we admit, we don't really pay a whole lot of attention to them. We agree with them if they agree with where we're already headed. I know that's not everybody. But the understanding of systemic racism is a collective process. People say, well, for 35 years we've been hearing, not just now in the economic downturn. For 35 years in the People's Institute, we asked systems and organizations, you got a problem with racism? Say, yeah, man, it's a big problem. Half of us on staff live with it every day and can't keep our head up because of it. The other half of us don't even think it exists. Say, well, you want to spend some time working on it? We always hear, what's the answer we hear? We don't have time. So I thought that you had a problem. Yeah, but we don't have time to put on it. See, and then they hear that it's going to cost something. What do we hear? We don't have no money. We hear that all the time. We work for agencies that might have millions of dollars in their budget, But guess what's not budgeted? Undoing systemic racism. So we got lots of money, even in the economic downturn. But we don't put our money necessarily in the ways that begin to undo the structural racism. Now, what Texas and Kentucky impressed me with when I watched them work is that in every workshop, and they'll talk to you about it, that I participated in, that they sponsored, the leadership was there. No one had another meeting. You know the celebrity drop by? You know? That's when someone comes in at the start of your session and says, this is really great work, and I wish you well, but I've got to go somewhere else. We're a busy people, but it's a sign. So what this strategy said was, if we sponsor a workshop but our leadership, meaning all the way up, can't find the time to attend, cancel the workshop and wait until you can be there. Every time, time after again. You know why? Because the people in the workshop were there for the first time. And when they didn't see leadership present, they said, this is no priority. You know, because I don't see my boss. How come my boss is not there? The boss said, well, I've been there 32 times. Yeah, but you ain't there this time. So we say, don't do it until you can all be present. You know why else you got to be present? Because you're organizing. You're not just informing. It's not just an in-service training. You've got to be in that room and watch people's body language. You got to see those who are checking their email. You know the BlackBerry slide? You nod your head. You ain't in the room. You're somewhere else. The problem with that is you're going to be somewhere else when it comes to dealing with disproportionality. We are preoccupied people. So the undoing racism is a tactic in an organizing strategy. It's where the People's Institute meets people. Now we've got an edge to us. Some people love us. In fact, most people like us. Some people really love us. Other people, they don't like us. And I guess who calls the commissioner? The ones who don't like us. You know, because there's an edge to it, because this country doesn't talk about its dominant culture. You want to see some disproportionate numbers? Look at the disproportionate numbers of who's running things in this country. See, we don't talk about that. We'll talk about, well, the children, disproportionately children of color. Yeah, well, those of us running those programs are disproportionately white. Oh, don't say that. That's impolite. Don't call white people by their name. Why the hell not? We're always calling you by yours. That's why we call you a minority group. That lets you know. See, that's not having to do with your numbers. That has to do with your status. You're of less importance in this society. I don't care if you're working for the man. That's what you're doing. You're working. You just got a better job than some. See, we have to be real if we're going to undo racism. Now, we can do diversity training, which is important. But if you don't deal with issues of power in the society, diversity will divert you from what the issue is. Oh, we're such a mixed group. Hell, we've been a mixed people. Native Americans were mixed before we ever got here. You know, they were diverse. They didn't need Europeans to round them out. You know? So this issue of racism, everybody knows all about it. But it's curious, if we know about it, how come our numbers still remain so alarmingly high? How come there are those of us who can work, who refuse to deal with racism? How come you can still work for people and communities historically oppressed by the concept of race and say you don't want to be involved? Well, yeah, there ought to be a way to say, well, you need to find another line of work. You know? I was in Texas, a friend of yours. And he got upset because I had mentioned the Alamo, but I wasn't appropriately reverential. I said, listen, I know all about David Crockett and them. I walked to the Pure Oil station to get one, you know. And the owner didn't watch TV because he worked nights, so he ran me off. You know, but I know all about the Alamo. Now this is what I also know. you know, that the children who go into school today in those states, 55% of Mexico's land base, 1848, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, creating the states that now can make you president of the United States if you win those, we're all a part of Mexico, started an economic downturn that still exists today, with people overcoming our enforced borders and returning home. Rio Grande ain't nothing but a stream. You know, that's our border, we'll build a wall. Well, it ain't yours. We're going to cross your wall. You know? And I said, well, 65%, he was very proud, 65% of our public schools are Mexican American. I said, well, how are you going to teach that Alamo story now? These are the great-great-great-grandchildren of Santa Anna, not Davy Crockett. So everything about what we've known, we have to look at through new anti-racist lens. And we have to understand, as a collective, not just a collection of individuals. This individual expertise is killing us. It's whether or not we can organize our expertise into a force for change. Texas also did another thing, and I wrote it down where I wouldn't forget to say it. Besides having the leadership present, that community partners, those are important depending on who the partners are. And I'm sure they're all good. But if they're 501c3, they're not necessarily accountable to the constituents that you are serving, those whose children are being placed in foster care and in the public system. I'm not saying all of us, but many of us, we're accountable up, not down. We might speak in behalf of the people, but we're not accountable to it. Now, if that's not you, don't worry about it. If it is you, take a look at it, you know. That's all we're saying. So that's what I wanted to share. Now, you're going to hear some amazing testimony this morning from those who've been working collectively, trying to bring all of the people who work for them, including the bosses, through a process where community is participating, not just those of us who serve the community, but those of us who constitute it. It's a big difference. You know, we are well-meaning, but ultimately we can be handled by authorities that have control over whether or not we are. Now, there's students in the room. And students are usually left out of the process. But as we say, students are gatekeepers in training. When you leave the university, the jobs that are going to be open for you, if there are going to be in these large systems. And you might leave with an analysis and an idealism, but you work for the department of whatever for a few years. See if you still hold on to that idealism, or see if it doesn't beat you down. Now, beware of white folks pointing to the highest ranking person of color in their institution. We got an associate dean who's Latina. Yeah. Yeah, our former dean was black. Yeah. See, that don't mean that those folk have power. That's conditional power. You act up. See how long you last. You speak a truth and see if we ain't got something for you. Now here's the last thing. I really am going to lose. Folks in positions of authority, it's amazing how quickly they retire once they start speaking out against racism. It's amazing how quickly they are promoted. We got another spot for you. It's a promotion. You know what happens when you get promoted? The place you just left springs back like a coil to its original formation. Then you start all over again. Well, the new commissioner wants to go in another direction. What other direction is there to go? You know? Well, he ain't too cool on this People's Institute. Y'all got a little attitude. So, well, you know, you need an attitude in this country when it comes to race. These aren't just numbers, as you well know. And these families, if they were organized, This is who brought about the revolution in this. We've never had a social movement in this country that was not the result of organizing. You just check your own history, whether it's labor, gender, civil rights, anti-war. There wasn't legislation that created those movements. That came because of the movements. But you see today what we have. We don't do the organizing. So I'll end with that. And thank you for inviting me. I'm sure I'll be back next year, and I look forward to it.